Hello, boys and girls. It's time for literature with Mrs. Highsong again. Today is Thursday, April the 16th, and we will be reading chapter 14 of Lassie, Come Home. Tuesday, you read chapter 13 of Lassie, Come Home, and you learned that Lassie had to cross some very dangerous, rough waters in her travels. But you also learned that her sense of direction took over and that she was able to make it through. But she was badly beaten and bruised, and so she took shelter and rested for 9 days until she felt strong enough to travel again. She was still headed south, home to see Joe. Now, you need to make sure you have a pencil and your book open to page 120. So if you don't have those things, go ahead and hit pause and go get them now. I also hope that last week you enjoyed looking at a picture of my son's collie named Darcy while you were listening to me read the chapter. Today, you're going to be looking at a picture of Darcy and Marius and Emery. Those are all three of David's collies, and they're living with me right now. So we're having quite an exciting time. All right, here we go. Chapter 14, For to Kill the Beasties. 2 men crouched in a rude stone croft. The moonlight coming through the windowless gap in the wall above them revealed them faintly. They were dressed alike in rough, homespun tweed, except that the younger one wore a peaked cap and the other a great woolen tam-o'-shanter. For a long time there was nothing but the sound of their breathing. Then the younger one stirred. At that moment the older put out his hand to quiet him. "Whist," he said. They froze into stillness. "Did you hear aught, Andrew?" the younger one whispered. I thought. Silently they rose and stared out through the rectangular gap in the wall. Stretching away below them was the moonlit land, the grassy fields looking like those of a well-ordered park in the faint smoky blue of a thin mist. They stared a long time, their eyes and ears alert. "Nah, Andrew, I don't hear a thing." The older man nodded so that the tuft on his tam-o'-shanter bobbed back and forth. "I just thought I did." With the tension lifted, the younger man absent-mindedly took his pipe from his pocket. The other regarded him disapprovingly. "I wadna smoke, Jock. Hawkfield'd smell it clear." "Aye, that's so, but I'm dying for a smoke, and they'd smell them first, wouldn't they?" Jock nodded his head toward a great pen in the field below. There, in the moonlight, the great flock of sheep stood unmoving and still. They were packed so close together that their backs made a sea of gray. "And they'd hear aught long afore us," Jack continued, motioning with his head back over his shoulder. "At least my Donnie would." Hearing his name, one of the 2 dogs in the shelter lifted his head expectantly. The other sighed and watched alertly to see if the long vigil was at last over. "I don't see the idea of keeping them in here anyhow, Andrew. We should leave them outside by the sheep." Nah, Jock. If they're outside, them devils will never come. They're that canny, lad, it passes understanding." "Aye, they maun be canny, all right," the younger agreed. 6 nights we sit up on guard and not a sign of 'em. The 7th we gang to our homes for sleep, and no sooner are our ees closed nor doon they come on us, ravening and slaughtering. 7 lambs and twat ewes. 7 lambs, mind you. Why do they no come when the nights were ready for 'em?" The older man ignored the last question. "Ye should be thankful, Jock. 16 it was Archie Forsyth lost the Sabbath, and Mackenzie 13 the night before." "Ah, the brutes. The Sabbath and all other days is the same to them devils. The black-haired creatures of Satan, if I ever caught one of them." The younger man left the rest unsaid. "What makes him do it, Andrew?" "Ah, lad, that's one of those things perhaps it's not given us to understand. But I suppose dogs is like humans, Jock. Most of them is honest and trusty, but every so often there's one born that has greed and cruelty and dishonor in his heart, and while he poses daytimes as a perfect Galahad, as soon as dark hides him he becomes what he is, a ravening devil. Aye, Andrew, you know heaven above knows I have a love for dogs. Why, yon beastie of mine, there's not a thing I wouldn't do for him, or a care I wouldn't give him, or a trust I wouldn't put in him. But they devils of sheep killers, they're not dogs. You know, Andrew, what I think sometimes?" "What, Jock?" "Well, you may laugh, But times I think them sheep killers is not dogs, but they're the ghosts of murderers who've been hanged that return disguised in the body of animals." The young man said that in such an eerie tone that they both shuddered. Then the older shook off the feeling. Nah, Jock, they're just dogs, and ravening ones that's gone bad, and we should have pity on 'em. I'll have no pity if I ever see one. If I draw a bead on one of 'em, whist! They froze again as the older man gave his signal. There it is. Where? Just dipped over the rise, Jock. Get your gun, man, quick. The younger grasped his rifle that leaned against the wall, and they waited. The silence grew too long. You're seeing things, Andrew, the younger said finally. There's not, nor will be while we're here. The devils, they gnaw we're waiting. They gnaw it. Hush, Jock, be still, will ye? The younger complied, but the long minutes dragged, and the tedium was too much for him. He spoke again. Andrew? Aye. You know, I were just thinking it's curious that with us, a dog should be our greatest helper and also our greatest enemy. That's it, Jock. It's because they're so clever to help us. They become so clever to hurt us when they turn bad. And any of 'em can turn bad too, Jock. Don't forget that. Even your own beastie that you treasure so much. Once they taste sheep blood, they become killers. Not my Donnie. Nah, nor I think my Vic either, but it's true. Once any of 'em kill, they're started and they go on killing not for food, but for the joy of bloody slaughtering. My Donnie wouldn't. You can never tell, Jock. There's some dogs now that'll be perfect and upright with their own flock. Then comes night. They'll travel far on, sometimes meeting like by appointment with others of their kind. Then like a pack of wolves they'll descend, ravening on the flock, and they'll tear through 'em, killing and slaughtering, and they'll be away again before help comes. Then they'll separate, and each steal back home. And come the next day, they'll guard their own flock as if butter wouldn't melt in their mouths. But not my Donnie. If I thought he did. They were silent a while, and then Jock spoke again. It seems sad that us, while had the greatest fondness for dogs, must destroy 'em. Aye, but little destroying will do if we keep chattering all night. They'd never come. The silence settled again, and the patch of moonlight moved across the floor of the rude croft. And then, at last, the older man spoke again, this time his voice trembling with emotion. Here they come! The other jumped to position, leaning his rifle on the ledge. They both stared, breath held, at the landscape far to their left. Aye, there. Jock sighted along his rifle. There was a movement by the stone wall. Then, beyond the lined sights of the gun, he saw a dog. There was no air of stealth to it. It came over the wall and trotted plainly into view. It was Lassie. It was a week since she had left her den, but she still traveled with a limp. She came over in the field in the clear moonlight, going straight and steady as if following a compass route. In the stone hut, the older man released his pent breath. Let him have it, Jock, he cried in a hoarse whisper. The younger man cuddled his rifle but did not fire. Where's the others? What's the odds? Let him have it. It's a collie. Do you ken what it is? Nah, it's a stray. One of them wild ones. Forby. Let it have it, lad. Don't miss now. Jock turned his head. I handled one of these things in the war, Andrew. I didn't miss, not when I pay for my own ammunition. Then let fly, Jock. The younger man cuddled the stock of his rifle again. He held his breath. Slowly he brought the sights in line. Now he saw over the V of the hindsight the steady, unwavering tip of the foresight. Above it was the tiny figure of a trotting collie. The collie moved, but it always stayed in the tip of the foresight as the gun followed it along. Jock took up the slack on the trigger. He felt the second pull beginning to take up. Hurry, Jock, now! Jock lifted his head and laid the rifle down. I can't do it, Andrew. Shoot it, man, shoot it! Nah, Andrew, it doesn't look like one of they devils. Look, it pays no heed to aught. Let's see if it gangs near the sheep, for it seems to be paying no heed to them at all. Look. It's a stray. We have a right to shoot it. Let's see if it gangs near the sheep. If it does, Hawk, ye gormless, shoot it! The older man's voice rose in urgent tones. The cry floated over the night to where Lassie trotted. She paused in her tracks and turned her head. Then it all struck her together. The sound of men, the scent of them, the movement in the window of the stone hut. It was man that would chain her, man that she must avoid. She wheeled and sprang away in a sudden lope. There, it's seen us, let him have it. The sudden death of Lassie half convinced the younger man, that he had misjudged the dog below, for Lassie's actions were like those of a guilty dog. He lifted the rifle quickly, cuddled the stock, and fired. At the crack that shattered the night, Lassie leaped away. The ugly whine of a bullet passing by her left shoulder made her veer quickly to the right. She raced across the field. There was another shot, and she felt a burning shock in her flank. "Nigh, I hit it." "You didn't. Look at it go." Inside the small shelter, the voices of the men mixed with those of the dogs, who now cried pandemonium. "Let him out." The old man raced to the door and opened it. The dogs, then the men, tumbled out and raced away after Lassie's tracks. "Go get it! Sick 'em!" yelled Andrew. The dogs raced along, baying at the chase. They went down the slope, bellies flat, and their bodies almost doubling in two with the urgency of their speed. Behind them came the men, but they were soon left behind. The dogs suddenly swerved and bayed louder, for they had picked up the trail, the warm scent of new blood. Ahead of them, Lassie galloped. Twice she halted suddenly and snapped at the flank where the bullet had creased her leg muscles. She could hear the pursuing dogs behind, but she did not increase her pace. She had no fear of dogs. It was man she wished to leave behind, and her senses told her they were not near. But now she feared him more than ever. Not only could his hands chain and pen one up, but he could make the terrifying thunder noises that hurt the ears and that somehow reached out like a long invisible whip and brought pain such as that which now tore at her. Truly, man was an evil menace. Steadily she loped along, feeling that perhaps she would soon leave them all behind. But the other dogs were fresh. They had not traveled, half-starved, for hundreds of weary miles, and they were soon within sight of her. They bayed a higher note, and despite the best speed that Lassie could attain, they were soon behind her. Then one charged at her flank, tearing it with his teeth and buffeting her with his shoulder to bring her down. But one thing Lassie still had. She might be weary and starved, but she had no cowardice. She whirled like lightning and stood fearless. Her mane stood erect, and her lips were drawn back from her fangs. Her attitude halted the other dogs in their tracks, for though of a much rougher breed, they were of collie blood too, and they understood the warning. Here was no cur to be chivied and chased like a rabbit. As if she had driven away a petty worry, Lassie turned in obedience to the great driving force inside her. She must go on her way, south and ever south. But the others took it for a signal of fear, and together they charged. They tore past her as collies will, slashing as they went. For collies do not rush and hold. Their way of fighting is not like that of the bulldog, nor like that of the terrier, which dodges and worries and shakes. They rather desire to run past an enemy, giving the long, slashing wounds that wear a foe down. It was Lassie's own way of fighting, and instinctively she knew how to meet it. However, as she whirled to meet one adversary, the other would race in and slash from the other direction. But Lassie pivoted, waiting to meet the nearest foe. She stood, her head erect, watchful in the moonlight. The one behind her charged. She dodged it and started on her way again. But the other was racing in. She turned again, a second too late. The charge buffeted her, and she half fell. The other raced in before she could regain her feet. The three became a snarling composite pile. Lassie fought herself free, and then it began all over again. One dog charging, the other racing in as she turned to meet the first. The battle was long, and it was still going on as the men arrived, panting from their long run. They stood and watched. "Didn't you shoot the new Jock?" Andrew puffed. "You might have hit my Vicky." Jock nodded and cradled the gun on his arm. His head was thrust forward. He watched closely the battle that the one tired, travel-weary dog put up against the two sturdy ones, rough and heavy and hard from their years of work. And often he thought that the two must win. But Lassie had something that the others had not. She had blood. She was a purebred dog, and behind her were long generations of the proudest and best of her kind. This theory of bloodlines in animals is not an empty one, as any animal lover knows. Where the cold-blood horse will quit and give no more, the thoroughbred will answer and give another burst of speed gallantly, even if he is spending the last ounce of life strength. Where the mongrel dog will whine and slink away, the purebred will still stand with uncomplaining fearlessness. And it was this blood that won for Lassie. As one dog charged, she met him. Unmindful of the other coming at her flank, she drove him down. He lay in a moment of surrender. Then Lassie did a curious thing. Instead of taking an easy victory and driving at his throat, She merely placed a forepaw stiffly over his body as if holding him there as a wrestler would. As long as he remained motionless, he would not suffer. Then, as he lay still and unprotesting, Lassie faced the other dog. She lifted her head where the fangs gleamed white, and from her chest came the slow, low rumble of challenge. The other dog looked at her, and then he too lay down and began licking a wound on his paw. It was armistice. So the dog stood for a moment, the one prone under Lassie's stiff paw, the other cleaning himself with an air that seemed to say, "I didn't have anything to do with this whole affair at all." It was only for a moment that picture remained, and then the madness of the fight left Lassie. The growl died in her throat, and she remembered what she had to do. She turned calmly and trotted away. Only then did one of the men behind dance and lift his voice. Now, Jock, shoot it!" But the younger man did not move, for in his mind he was not seeing dogs but men. He was remembering a certain day, and as he stood, the tired collie passed out of sight. "Losh, Jock, and why did you not shoot?" "I couldna, Andrew." "And why not?" "I were thinking of March 1918, Andrew, when they come over us, and the regiment stood. It were like that, Andrew. Yon collie, she fought the same way the Black Watch did, Andrew. In March, back in 1918. "Are ye daft?" "No, Andrew." The younger man wrinkled his brow. "March 1918, the older man scoffed. "Well, if it were a brave dog anyhow, Andrew, and it were going somewhere, and besides, I couldn't shoot, for I forgot to load up again." "Hawk, now that's something. Forget to load. I should think a soldier would never forget to load up again after he's fired." "Well, we have so many things to remember, Andrew," the younger man said. Then, as they turned away, he clicked open the breech gently, took out the cartridge from the chamber of his rifle, and slipped it in his pocket silently. With the dogs following them, the men went back to the rude shelter on the moonlit slope. So, boys and girls, I hope that you enjoy the rest of your week and your weekend. If you're interested in what Jock was talking about there at the end of the chapter about the Black Watch, you can look up the Black Watch with your parents on the internet and see what that was all about. And that might help to explain a little bit more about why Jock did not shoot Lassie. We're thankful for that, but it'll explain to you why he didn't. Also, if you need to go back and listen to this chapter again, or even read it for yourselves, I know that you're seeing some unusual words in these paragraphs, or in these chapters, and it's because you're listening to people from England talk. Many of you have that English accent that you love to use, and I'll bet you're using it when you read these chapters to yourself, when you hear these people talking, Sam and Joe, and Joe's mom. But now, today, you heard a Scottish accent. Jock and Andrew were Scottish, and they were speaking in a Scottish dialect. A dialect is a type of speaking. It might use different vocabulary, different grammar, and it definitely uses different pronunciations. And it's all based on where people live. So go back and read it again, or listen to it again if you need to. Look at those words that seem kind of different and strange, and see if you can figure out what all of those mean. All right, I love you all, and I miss you, and I'll look forward to talking with you again soon.